In the palace at Jericho, the air does not move. A king who had his own sons beheaded gives one last order. When I die, kill the elders of Israel, so the nation will weep anyway. This is the end of Herod the Great. How the man who raised ports and fortresses was destroyed by what he himself had sown: fear, suspicion, and solitude. A king for Rome, a stranger to his own people. He loved Mariamne and had her killed. He shifted allegiances with a coldness that saved his throne and doomed his house. When paranoia became law, the air changed with every rage. No one remained close enough to tell him the truth. And then the body began to speak for all of them. Josephus would write it without shaking. The flesh was failing while the mind stayed awake. But before symptoms and physicians, there was one last plot, the one meant to force a nation to mourn. Herod the Great ruled Judea from 37 BCE to 4 BCE. A reign defined by architectural magnificence and brutal tyranny. He expanded the Second Temple in Jerusalem into one of the wonders of the ancient world, erected fortresses, palaces, and entire cities. Yet this same man executed his beloved wife, Mariamne, her mother, and 2 of his sons. The Roman Emperor Augustus reportedly remarked, "It was safer to be Herod's pig than his son," a dark jest noting that, as a Jew, Herod would not eat pork but killing his children caused him no hesitation. He governed through terror, trusted no one, and in the end, his body betrayed him, as his soul had long since decayed. The illness that consumed him began subtly, a lingering pain, a fever that returned, until symptoms could no longer be ignored. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, writing in the 1st century CE, provides the most detailed account of Herod's demise, drawn from court records and eyewitnesses. His report, clinical yet horrifying, describes a death so revolting that it defied belief, though multiple sources confirm the core facts. Herod's body, once the vessel of power and ambition, became his prison and torment. Don't forget to subscribe to Rotten Ages to sustain our channel. Your support means a lot. Let's dive into the story of Herod the Great. Modern medical historians have attempted to diagnose Herod's condition. The descriptions suggest a combination of ailments: chronic kidney disease, Fournier's gangrene, perhaps complications from diabetes or cancer. Yet the precise terminology matters less than the experience itself. This was not a swift death, nor a brief illness. It was a prolonged collapse lasting weeks, possibly months, each day introducing new agony and degradation. And through it all, Herod remained lucid, trapped within his decaying flesh. Politically, his last days mirrored the decay of his body. He was a king without a trusted heir. Having executed so many relatives, his succession was chaos. His paranoia only deepened with age. From his sickbed he issued death orders, revised his will repeatedly, uncertain whom to favor or destroy. The kingdom he had built with ruthless efficiency was unraveling before his eyes. To grasp the horror of Herod's death, we must first understand his rise. Herod was not born to royalty. His father, Antipater, was an Idumean. Despite his throne, Herod was never fully accepted by the Jewish elite. He was viewed as an outsider, a Roman puppet, occupying a throne meant for descendants of David. This insecurity shaped every decision of his reign. It fueled his suspicion, his cruelty, and the isolation that haunted his final years. He seized power in 37 BCE, after a brutal civil war. His rival, Antigonus, was executed by the Romans at Herod's request. Beheaded with an axe, a humiliating death reserved for slaves. Herod learned early that power demanded both skill and ruthlessness. He cultivated ties with Rome's greatest, first Mark Antony, then Octavian, later Augustus Caesar, switching loyalties at just the right moment. This adaptability made him a survivor, able to read the tides of power. But survival carried a price: constant fear, endless displays of loyalty, and ceaseless proving of his worth. At his peak, Herod was formidable, physically strong, tireless, commanding in battle and in politics. His architectural feats were staggering. The temple's expansion transformed it into one of the grandest structures of the ancient world. The artificial harbor at Caesarea Maritima was an engineering wonder. Masada, perched atop a desert cliff, became a palace fortress that seemed to defy gravity. These were not just constructions but declarations of permanence, attempts to carve his name into eternity. Yet even at his height, he was never secure. The Jewish populace regarded him with suspicion or hatred. His monuments were seen as vanity projects, his Roman loyalty as betrayal. He tried to win their favor during famine. He melted his gold to buy grain. He lowered taxes, created jobs, but none of it worked. He was not one of them. The rejection festered, Turning to paranoia, he became convinced everyone plotted against him, even his family. This paranoia reached its peak with his wife Mariamne, a Hasmonean princess. She linked Herod to Judea's ancient royal line. He loved her, as much as a man like Herod could love, but love could not conquer suspicion. When rumors surfaced, likely false, that she plotted against him, he had her executed. Sources say he went mad with grief, crying her name, demanding she be brought to him, unable to accept what he had done. After Mariamne's death, executions multiplied. Her mother Alexandra was killed. His sons Alexander and Aristobulus were accused of treason and strangled. These were not enemies, but his own children, murdered because Herod imagined threats. The executions sent shockwaves through the region. Augustus' remark about Herod's pig came after this, a quip concealing horror. Herod had become a monster devouring his own bloodline, and like all monsters, he would eventually turn his cruelty inward. As he aged, his cruelty sharpened. His court seethed with intrigue. He encouraged it, believing chaos kept rivals divided. By his 60s, when illness struck, Herod was a man without love or trust. When his body began its slow descent into agony, he faced it as he had ruled, alone, terrified, clinging to power even as it slipped from his grasp. The first signs were easy to dismiss: a persistent fever, a stomachache. In a world where minor ailments were constant, Herod saw no reason for concern. He had physicians trained in Greek medicine, versed in Hippocrates and Galen. They examined him, prescribed diets, ointments, and bloodletting to balance humors. None of it worked. They had no idea they were witnessing the onset of one of the most horrifying deaths in recorded history. The fever persisted, mild but draining. Ancient doctors thought it came from internal imbalance, but modern medicine suggests infection, perhaps from the kidneys or intestines. Alongside fever came unbearable itching. Josephus describes Herod scratching himself until he bled. Servants applied oils, but nothing helped. The itching consumed his waking hours and disturbed his sleep, likely caused by uremia, toxins building up in his blood, as his kidneys failed. Then came abdominal pain, first mild, then stabbing, radiating into his groin. Remedies failed. The pain only worsened. Inside flesh was beginning to die, while he still lived. Herod's appetite vanished. Food that once delighted him, now revolted him. When he forced himself to eat, his stomach rebelled, and he vomited violently. He began to lose weight rapidly. His once imposing figure became gaunt. His robes hung from his shrinking body. Whispers filled the palace. Was the king dying? Should courtiers begin preparing for the next ruler? Yet Herod's authority remained terrifying. Even in weakness he commanded executions, and fear still protected him. No one dared speak of succession openly. As his body deteriorated, his mind followed. The paranoia that had long defined him now consumed him completely. His son Antipater, long positioned as heir, was accused of plotting to poison him, a charge that may have had some basis, though none could prove it. His doctors, baffled and desperate, consulted texts, invoked gods, and experimented with every known treatment. Bloodletting, diet changes, baths, herbs, even amulets, nothing helped. Some whispered that his disease was divine punishment. Others called it an incurable corruption of the body. Herod, in agony, tried everything. Each day brought new torments, new symptoms. Weeks passed. His fever never broke. The itching intensified. The pain grew unbearable. His legs began to swell. The skin stretched and glistened from trapped fluid. His feet became too large for sandals. When pressed, the swollen flesh retained finger-shaped indentations, a sign of edema, now recognized as kidney failure. The king, who once strode confidently through marble halls, could now barely stand. As winter approached, his condition worsened. Josephus's account becomes gruesomely detailed here, suggesting even hardened observers were horrified. The swelling spread upward, his abdomen distending grotesquely. But the true horror began in his groin. His genitals became inflamed and discolored. The tissue began to die. Modern experts believe Herod suffered from Fourniers gangrene, a fast-spreading bacterial infection that devours living flesh. Without surgery or antibiotics, the disease was a slow death sentence. Bacteria invaded deep tissues, cutting off blood supply. Starved of oxygen, the flesh died, providing fertile ground for new bacterial growth. It advanced relentlessly, consuming inches of flesh each day. The visible signs were ghastly. His groin darkened, patches turning red, then purple, then black. The skin split, revealing rotting tissue beneath. The pain defied imagination, nerves destroyed, yet not fast enough to dull sensation. He could neither sit nor lie comfortably. Every movement sent shockwaves of agony through his body. His physicians could do nothing but offer weak wine and opium for pain, neither strong enough to dull the torment. Soon another horror emerged. The smell. As flesh rots, it emits a stench of decay so primal that it triggers instinctive revulsion. Josephus records that the odor from Herod's body filled his palace. Servants gagged and fled. Physicians wrapped cloths around their faces. Even his family, accustomed to courtly endurance, could not remain in the room. The king's chambers reeked of death. For Herod, who had lived for image and control, this was psychological torture. The man who had commanded armies now lay helpless, trapped in filth. When he glimpsed his reflection, perhaps in a polished cup or water basin, the face staring back was yellowed, hollow-eyed, almost skeletal. His mind remained sharp enough to comprehend the degradation. The doctors were panic-stricken. No theory explained this kind of unstoppable decay. Some declared it the wrath of heaven, fitting punishment for his crimes. In an age when disease and divinity intertwined, Herod's condition seemed a living allegory of moral corruption made flesh. And the nightmare deepened. His lungs began filling with fluid, pulmonary edema. Each breath became a struggle, rasping and shallow. His intestines ulcerated, producing bloody diarrhea. His skin erupted in sores that oozed pus. His tongue swelled, he drooled constantly. Every organ was failing, yet consciousness remained intact. He was forced to witness, moment by moment, his own body collapsing into filth. Then came the worms. Josephus records that Herod's genitals became infested with maggots, real, not symbolic. Flies, drawn by the stench, laid eggs in his rotting flesh, and the larvae fed upon the dead tissue. Medical experts confirm that this is consistent with advanced gangrene. Herod's body had become a living corpse, an ecosystem of decay. Modern medicine sometimes uses sterile maggots to clean wounds, but Herod's infestation was wild, uncontrolled. The maggots wriggled deep in open wounds, devouring flesh while he still lived. The sensation must have been indescribable. The crawling movement inside one's own body, the knowledge that one is being eaten alive. Servants tried scraping them out, but removal tore away living flesh, causing more bleeding, and more flies arrived each day, laying new eggs. The infection spread beyond his groin. Open sores on his legs and abdomen became infested. His rectum, damaged by ulcers, swarmed with insects. The king who had ruled by fear was now food for creatures he could not command. He had become less than human, a decaying host for vermin. Servants broke down from horror. Some refused to continue tending him. Others were forced to replace them, only to flee soon after. In Jewish tradition, contact with the dead rendered one impure. Herod, alive yet rotting, had become a source of defilement. Priests could not approach him. Rituals were forbidden in his presence. Symbolically, he had crossed into Sheol, the land of death, while still breathing. The image was potent. The man who sought immortality through temples and monuments was now a walking corpse. His own body testified to the futility of his ambition. Power and glory had decayed into pus and worms. During brief moments of lucidity, he screamed, not only from pain but rage. He cursed fate, gods, and his own flesh. Days blurred into weeks. The infestation renewed itself. Maggots matured, dropped away and returned. His body had become a breeding ground, a grotesque cycle of life and death. The physicians could not stop it. Opium dulled the edges but not the agony. Wine offered fleeting oblivion but made him sicker. Herod's body clung stubbornly to life, forcing him to endure every stage of his decay, and still, even as he rotted, his mind schemed. Power had defined him too long to abandon. Lying in filth, unable to stand, he continued to plot. The court trembled under the orders that still emerged from his bedchamber. He changed his will again and again, naming and disinheriting sons in turn, driven by suspicion. Archelaus, Antipas, Philip, all were alternately chosen and rejected. The palace lived in terror. Every whisper could be fatal. No one knew which heir to support. Herod's paranoia infected the entire household. The kingdom that had feared his power now feared his dying mind. As Herod's agony deepened, his kingdom crumbled. Yet even dying, he remained dangerous. Every rumor, every whisper of succession could trigger an execution. The courtiers lived in dread. His paranoia had become their daily terror. He knew that his people would celebrate his death. The thought enraged him. Even on his deathbed, he conceived a plan so monstrous it would ensure that his name inspired fear even in death. He ordered his sister Salome and her husband Alexas to assemble the leading Jewish elders in Jericho, under pretext of a royal summons. Once gathered, they were to be executed upon his death, so that mourning would fill the land. "If they will not weep for me," he said, "they shall weep for their own." This was Herod to the end, controlling, vindictive, determined to command emotion through terror. Meanwhile, his physicians, desperate to do something, proposed one final hope. About 25 miles from Jericho, near the Dead Sea, lay the hot springs of Callao, famed throughout the ancient world for their supposed healing powers. The water, rich in minerals and steaming from the earth, was said to cure even the gravest afflictions. Herod, clinging to any thread of survival, agreed to be carried there. The journey was agony. He could neither walk nor sit upright. Carried in a litter, surrounded by guards and attendants, every movement sent waves of pain through his swollen, decaying body. The heat and stench were unbearable. Servants rotated constantly. None could stand near him for long. The journey that should have taken a day stretched into several. When they reached the springs, the scene was surreal. Rising steam, sulfur in the air. Pilgrims fleeing at the sight and smell of the dying king. Herod was lowered into the water with excruciating difficulty. The scalding heat touched his open sores. He screamed in agony. The attendants panicked, pulling him from the pool. His body convulsed violently. For a moment they thought he had died. When he regained consciousness, he forbade any further attempts. The supposed cure had only worsened his suffering. The last hope was gone. In that moment, something within Herod broke. The man who had spent his life defying fate finally understood that death was inevitable. The realization marked a turning point. Some sources say he grew quiet and fatalistic. Others claim his cruelty sharpened again. Perhaps both were true. He was still a king, and still feared. The palace became a place of dread, filled with the smell of decay and the sounds of the dying king's labored breathing. Even his attendants approached only when ordered, holding cloths to their faces. The sight of him was unbearable. The bloated abdomen, the blackened skin, the constant oozing sores. Every human dignity had been stripped away. When the pain became intolerable, Herod begged for stronger medicine. His physicians, already at the limits of what opium and wine could offer, refused to risk killing him, though death would have been mercy. Desperate to escape, Herod attempted suicide. He asked for a knife under the pretense of cutting fruit, intending to stab himself. But his attendants, suspecting his intent, took the blade away. Too weak to fight them, he collapsed, screaming with frustration. The commotion spread through the palace. "The king is dead." Prisoners heard the rumor, including his imprisoned son Antipater, accused of treason. Believing himself free, Antipater rejoiced, bribing guards and boasting that he would soon be king. The celebration was premature. Herod still lived, and when news of his son's reaction reached him, his fury blazed. Even on the brink of death, he gave one last command. Antipater was to be executed immediately. It was his final act of cruelty, a father ordering the death of his last remaining son. Roman approval was technically required for such an execution, but Herod would not wait. Soldiers dragged Antipater from his cell and killed him within hours. 5 days later, Herod himself would follow. After Antipater's death, the king's strength ebbed rapidly. The swelling worsened, until his abdomen was distended and tight as a drum. His breathing became shallow, each gasp a wheeze. The smell, already unbearable, grew stronger. Servants burned incense constantly, but the fetor seeped through walls and floors. The entire palace stank of corruption. Herod drifted in and out of consciousness. The final days brought new horrors. Convulsions racked his body. Sweat poured from him, and smelled foul. He could no longer control his bowels or bladder. The attendants tried to clean him, but his body excreted faster than they could act. He lay in filth, moaning, his mind flickering between awareness and delirium. And still his heart kept beating. His lungs still dragged in air. It was as though life itself refused to release him, forcing him to endure every moment of his punishment. Religious observers saw divine justice. On his final day, his extremities turned cold, his skin blue-grey, his pulse faltered, his breathing came in shallow gasps, broken by long pauses. Those around him knew the pattern. Death was imminent. The courtiers waited, ready to act the instant he was gone. In the outer chambers, Political factions whispered, each preparing to seize advantage the moment his heart stopped. Whether Herod was conscious at the end is uncertain. Some accounts say he slipped into unconsciousness, others that he remained aware until his final breath. When at last he died, the atmosphere in the palace shifted instantly. The tension of months gave way to silence, not grief, but relief. The great tyrant was dead. Servants, courtiers, and family members could breathe freely for the first time in years, but the room where he lay was a scene of horror. The body, swollen and blackened, had begun to deflate as gases escaped. The skin hung loose, the face frozen in a rictus that looked like a scream. The smell was overpowering. Even those accustomed to death recoiled. Herod the Great, builder, conqueror, tyrant, was now a heap of decaying flesh that no one wanted to touch. Preparations for Herod's burial began immediately, though few wanted the task. His corpse was too decayed to handle easily. Normally, bodies were washed, anointed with oils and spices, and wrapped in linen. But Herod's flesh was so decomposed that it tore at the slightest touch. The stench filled the entire palace. Even seasoned attendants gagged. The embalmers did what they could, using vast quantities of aromatic herbs and spices to mask the smell, wrapping him in multiple layers of cloth to contain the corruption. Despite the horror, the funeral proceeded with pomp. Herod had planned it himself, a final act of self-glorification. His body was laid upon a golden bier, and surrounded by jewels, purple cloth, and symbols of royal authority. Soldiers in armor lined the route. Behind them came the royal family, officials and musicians playing solemn dirges. Professional mourners wailed and tore their clothes, their cries echoing through the streets. Yet everyone knew it was performance, not grief. The people lining the roads were not mourning but watching. Some even smiled. The tyrant who had ruled through fear was finally gone. The procession wound its way from Jericho to the Herodium, the fortress palace Herod had built south of Jerusalem. There, at the summit, a tomb had been prepared for him long before his death. When the procession reached the Herodium, the body was placed within the prepared tomb chamber. Layers of linen, spices, and stone sealed it from the world. The doors were closed, and the king was entombed among his monuments. For a brief moment, the silence of the desert swallowed the echoes of mourning. Yet even in death, Herod found no rest. Centuries later, during the Jewish revolt against Rome, rebels destroyed his tomb, smashing it to pieces in hatred of the man who had once oppressed their ancestors. His sarcophagus was shattered, his bones scattered. When archaeologist Ehud Netzer uncovered the remains of the tomb in 2007, its destruction was clear. Herod's final monument had been obliterated, the ultimate irony for a man obsessed with permanence. Herod's death brought neither peace nor stability. His kingdom, already unstable, collapsed into chaos almost immediately. His surviving sons, Archelaus, Antipas, and Philip, began to compete for power, each claiming legitimacy. Herod's final will, written and rewritten countless times, left confusion rather than clarity. Archelaus received the largest portion, ruling Judea, Samaria, and Idumea as ethnarch. Antipas governed Galilee and Perea, and Philip took the territories beyond the Jordan. But the arrangement satisfied no one. Archelaus proved cruel and incompetent. Revolts broke out within months of his accession. Rome intervened. Augustus Caesar, weary of disorder in a region vital to imperial control, deposed Archelaus after 10 years and exiled him to Gaul. His territory was placed under direct Roman administration. Thus, the Herodian dynasty began to dissolve. Herod Antipas, the son who had escaped his father's paranoia, ruled longer but never achieved greatness. It was he who later ordered the execution of John the Baptist and mocked Jesus before Pilate, a faint echo of his father's cruelty, though lacking his ambition. Philip governed quietly until his death, leaving no heir. Within a generation, Herod's entire legacy, the kingdom he had built through blood and fear, was gone. Medieval chroniclers embellished the tale, describing worms devouring his body as a sign of God's curse. Artists depicted him surrounded by demons, or writhing in flames. Modern historians, though less theological, find the ancient reports strikingly accurate. Medical experts analyzing Josephus's account conclude that every symptom described, the fever, the itching, the swelling, the gangrene, the worms, corresponds precisely with real medical conditions. Chronic kidney failure explains the itching and fluid retention. Fournier's gangrene accounts for the rotting flesh and infestation. Heart disease and pulmonary edema match the breathing difficulties. Even his fluctuating mental state aligns with the delirium of advanced infection and gerenia. Yet beyond symbolism lies the man himself, a figure of contradictions. Herod was a brilliant builder and a ruthless killer, a political survivor and a paranoid tyrant. He expanded the Second Temple yet murdered its priests. He fed the poor during famine yet slaughtered his own sons. His ambition reshaped Judea's landscape and scarred its people for generations. His death encapsulated that duality. It was both biological decay and moral collapse, both the end of a man and the unraveling of an empire. He had sought to make himself eternal through monuments of stone, but those stones crumbled. His name endured not through glory, but through horror. In the centuries that followed, Herod's story was retold countless times, as history, as sermon, as cautionary tale. Writers and preachers invoked his name whenever they wished to illustrate the fall of the arrogant. The worms that consumed his flesh became a metaphor for guilt and damnation. Even today, his death is remembered as one of the most terrifying in recorded history. The ruins of his fortresses still stand, the Herodium's silhouette rising from the desert, Masada's cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, the broken remnants of Caesarea's harbor. They remain monuments to a paradox, the brilliance of his vision and the darkness of his soul. In the end, Herod's story is not just about one man's cruelty or one kingdom's decay, it is about the illusion of control. He believed he could shape destiny through power, architecture, and fear. But no empire, no monument, no dynasty could save him from the truth that all men share. The body fails, power fades, and time devours even kings. Herod's life began with ambition and ended in rot, and so his name endures, not as the immortal king he dreamed to be, but as a warning carved into the annals of history that greatness built on cruelty ends not in triumph, but in corruption.